When I was just 10 years old, whenever my younger brother and I had nothing to do, we would go to our grandfather's house to listen to his experiences about the Aswang. This story took place in the province of Negros Occidental during the 1970s. It is a story from my grandfather and uncle about a neighbor they had, whom we will call Fernan. He ended up in their place because his wife lived there. Before he moved to their village, the houses were far apart. To fully understand, let's put this in Fernan's point of view. I am Fernan, 24 years old. I recently moved to Negros Occidental because it is where my wife is from. I will not mention the exact location for everyone's privacy. I have a wife, whom we will call Paloma. She was 19 years old at that time. Paloma was beautiful morena, with a well-defined nose, and her eyes seemed to speak when she looked at you. She also had a well-proportioned body, which captivated me and made me fall deeply in love with her, especially because she was kind and caring. A complete package. Paloma was the youngest of 3 siblings. Her older brother was well-built, tall, but had deep-set eyes that always seemed sleep-deprived. I met Paloma in Cebu. She worked as a sales lady in a large establishment. We grew close, and before long, she became pregnant. When her parents found out, they sent us back to their place. But my wife stood her ground. She would only go home under one condition: if we lived separately from her family. I smiled because she was right. It was better for our home to be far from her family. There was a village between us and my in-laws. Because our home was far and secluded, you had to pass through rice fields and wooded areas before reaching us. Behind our house, not too far away, was a forest. Since I had a lot of work experience, I became a carpenter. I would leave Paloma at home during the day. She wasn't the fearful type, but before dusk, I would already be on my way home. I was saving up as much as I could for the day she would give birth. Not too far away, about a 20-minute walk, was the house of our neighbor, Mang Tazio. He was a kind man, a great storyteller. He also sold tuba and sometimes stopped by our house. Tuba is palm wine, very common in Visayan provinces. He said,
"Good morning, Fernan. I got quite a lot of tuba today, so I brought some for you. Hey, have you heard? Someone was killed in the next village. The body was torn apart. Almost no internal organs left. Be careful always, my boy. And it looks like your wife's due date is near. Always light some rubber, especially in the late afternoon and evening."
That's exactly what I've been doing, Mang Tazio. Thank you for your concern.
All right then, my boy. I'll be heading home now. I still have things to take care of. I'll come back for you next time, okay?
Paloma gave birth to a healthy baby. Her family only visited occasionally. As our child turned 2 months old, Paloma's family still visited only once in a while. Unbeknownst to me, Paloma had been uttering some kind of spell to put me and our child into deep sleep. Then, she would leave. This happened multiple times until our child turned 3 months old. One morning, Paloma woke up at around 10 a.m. "Love, you're already awake. Have you eaten? You look so pale, and it seems like you haven't had any sleep." According to my wife, she had overslept, probably because she had been up all night watching over our baby. I simply told her to rest for the day. I would take care of the chores so she could regain her strength. That day, I was free. My next workday was still a couple of days away. Out of nowhere, Paloma suddenly said,
"That's why I love you so much. You're caring and kind. If one day..."
She was about to continue speaking when her parents arrived. Let's call them Nanay Marta and Tatay Ako. They were accompanied by her older brother, whom we'll call Elmar, and Eric. After greeting them with respect, they said they would be having lunch at our place. They even brought some food to pair with drinks, and soon enough, we would be drinking together.
Let's make the most of this, Yor. This doesn't happen often.
They said. I replied, "Perfect timing. Mang Tasio will be passing by later with some tuba." I called Paloma. She stepped out onto the veranda and sat down, staring at her family. My wife looked worried and uneasy. She asked me to buy some snacks. Since the store was quite far, I took a while to return. The events that followed were only told to me later by my wife, when we had a serious conversation. While I was away, Paloma got angry because her family had brought a bag of meat. My wife often visited them at night, but she told them not to do anything that day. It was still too early for whatever it was they were planning to do. It's hard to control oneself when newly turned. Even Paloma, who has Aswang blood, struggles with it. She's afraid that when she gets her urges, she might not even recognize our child.
What are you thinking, Paloma? How could I prey on a child who has Aswang blood running through his veins?
Another brother asked.
If it transfers to him, Fernan will eventually become one of us.
Another sibling answered. But Paloma said,
We still didn't know if Jipoy had inherited being an Aswang or if he was fully human.
which terrified her. That's why she was often gone at night.
You just really love your husband. You're just afraid that if he finds out the truth, he'll leave you.
Eric added. At this point, their father scolded them. Their argument was leading nowhere. He said Paloma should be given time, and the day would come when I would join them. Instead, he told them to tend to the things Elmar had brought, because he had a feeling that something was approaching. Their mother comforted Paloma, wiping her face so that no one would notice her sadness. The family gathering continued. Just then, Mang Tasio passed by. It seemed like it was the first time Paloma's family had seen him. He was carrying several gallons of tuba, but after dropping them off, he immediately left. The drinking started around 2 in the afternoon and lasted until dusk. What puzzled me was that every time I reached for some food, Paloma would get to it first. She would eat and finish it before I could. Love, what's up with you? We're probably the only ones drinking here without any food to go with it, I said jokingly. But Paloma replied,
We still have some chickens. You can just slaughter one, and that can be our pulutan.
She reasoned that her older brother was a great cook, and that it was more important for her to eat what she wanted, so she could produce more milk for our baby. She even asked her brother Eric to slaughter and cook a chicken.
All right, brother-in-law. Stay there, and I'll grant the wish of this mother hen.
Eric said teasingly, laughing. When Eric finished cooking, he served it to me. When I tasted it, it seemed lacking in flavor. Tasteless, I thought to myself. But to avoid offending Eric, I forced myself to eat it. In my mind, I realized why Paloma didn't want me to taste it. Maybe her brother wasn't good at seasoning food. The gathering ended, and Paloma's family went home. A few days later, I ran into Mang Tasio. I was puzzled when he suddenly whispered something to me.
Fernan, so it's them, your wife's family. You know, my boy, don't take this the wrong way, all right? You're like family to me. This is just my advice. Pay attention to your wife's lineage, okay?
As far as I knew, Mang Tasio had been living in our place for a long time. Meanwhile, Paloma's family had only moved in from the neighboring village. Some of their relatives lived there, but their entire clan suddenly appeared in our area. There had been rumors about my wife's family. Half of their body rests, while the other half roams at night. I looked at Mang Tasio and asked, What do you mean, Mang Tasio? Instead of answering, he handed me something, an amulet that was supposed to counter any spell cast by an Aswang.
Never show this to anyone.
Mang Tasio warned as he handed me a small green stone.
Not even to your wife.
Though confused, I accepted it and thanked him. I didn't know why, but I somehow believed what Mang Tasio was saying. That night, I woke up and noticed that Paloma was not beside me. Meanwhile, our 3-month-old child was sound asleep. I looked for her, but I couldn't find her. So I just went back to bed and waited. Hours passed. It was already 3 in the morning. She was still not back. A little while later, I heard the door open. Someone entered the room and lay beside me. I pretended to be asleep, but what puzzled me, why did my wife seem freshly bathed? Why is she clean and fragrant at this hour of the night? The first thought that crossed my mind, Paloma had betrayed me. Maybe Mang Tasho was wrong. She's not an Aswang. Maybe she's seeing another man. The next morning, I immediately went to Mang Tasho and shared my concerns. Mang Tasho, I need to ask a favor. If my wife disappears again in the middle of the night, may I leave my child with you? Because I will follow her. He agreed. Several nights passed, but Paloma did not leave. It seemed like she was waiting for the right moment. Until one night. I pretended to fall asleep. I acted exhausted while Paloma lulled our child to sleep. At exactly midnight, I heard my wife murmuring a prayer. According to Mang Tasho, Aswangs use a prayer, a chant that induces sleep and blinds those who are awake so they won't be seen. But there was one thing she did not expect. The prayer did not work on me. Only our child was affected. He fell into a deep sleep. Moments later, Paloma silently left the house. I kept watch. I wouldn't be fooled. Carefully, I followed her. I saw her hastily enter the forest. My heart pounded in my chest, so I wrapped our baby in a blanket to keep him warm. I carried him in my arms and carefully followed my wife, walking as quietly as possible. The path was easy to navigate because the moonlight illuminated the way. Then I saw Paloma standing in the middle of the clearing. I hid behind the thick foliage of the trees. At first, I thought I would see another man waiting for her, but instead, I saw Paloma doing something unexpected. She took off her top. I was convinced. My suspicions were true. She was undressing. Any moment now, her lover would appear, right? But I was wrong. Suddenly, she smeared oil onto her waist and body. I watched closely as she started to moan, as if she was in pain. I was about to rush to her out of concern, until I was struck with horror. I saw something growing from her back. A few moments later, it became fully formed. Believe it or not, it was a massive pair of wings, bat-like wings. Her nails grew sharper, her fangs emerged. Slowly, Paloma's upper body began to separate from her lower half. Then, without warning, she soared into the sky. My first instinct was to run, but I had our child with me. I walked as fast as I could. When I passed by Mang Tasho's house, I woke him up. His entire family got up as well. I entrusted my child to them, so I wouldn't have any burden holding me back. Paloma had already flown quite far. I forced myself to keep up, alternating between walking and running, until eventually, the path started to look familiar to me. She was heading to her family's house. I cautiously approached and searched for a gap in the wall to peek through. And there, inside, I saw my wife devouring a chunk of flesh. If I wasn't mistaken, it was a human foot. Blood splattered everywhere, fresh, still warm, from a newly killed victim. I felt like vomiting. My stomach twisted, and it was as if my own intestines were crawling up my throat, desperate to escape. But despite my disgust, I endured it. I also saw her family, feasting on their victim with pure delight. They looked exactly like Paloma, inhuman, monstrous. Then, in a raspy voice, Paloma's father spoke.
My child, Paloma Fernan, should become one of us. That way you two can live here close to us.
Paloma didn't respond. She simply stared at her father, while continuing to gnaw on the meat. I covered my mouth to stop myself from making a sound. Slowly, I backed away. My legs trembled with every step. Cold sweat dripped from my skin, and along with that sweat, silent tears flowed from my eyes. I didn't even realize I was crying. It was a mix of regret, disgust, and self-loathing. Why didn't I get to know my wife and her family better before marrying her? I returned home, feeling as if the sky itself had collapsed on me. And there, I did something final. I covered Paloma's lower half with salt, while her exposed organs still squirmed, searching for their missing half. I felt disgusted as I stared at the yellowish fat and the deep red flesh of her lower half. It looked like a butchered cow. I waited for Paloma to return at dawn, my body shaking with rage, tears streaming down my face. When she arrived, I screamed at her. "So you come from a bloodline of MANANANGGAL. You never told me. It would be better, Paloma, if I just kill you now, before you can harm and kill more people." I was about to pour vinegar over her severed lower half when she begged me to stop. She pleaded, her voice desperate, as she hovered in the air, her wings flapping frantically. She swore that she loved me and our child more than anything, even more than her own family.
Please don't do this.
She cried, but I remained firm. Then she revealed something that made me pause. There was still a way to break the curse, if only I would help her. "Why didn't you tell me before, Paloma?" I demanded. "If I had known, maybe I could have helped you, or at least kept you away from your family. But you lied to me. You hurt me." Paloma continued to plead. She could still turn her back on her family. For us. That was the reason we had moved far away from them in the first place. She didn't want me to discover their secret. She never let me eat the meat her brother brought because it was human flesh. She didn't want me to be tainted. She also told me that she wasn't fully transformed yet, that she could still endure salt because she had only recently inherited her curse. She begged me to wash her lower half with clean water so she could return to her normal form. She didn't want our child to grow up without a mother. I hesitated, but in the end, my love for my wife won. I washed her lower body with water. I set aside the salt. Slowly, Paloma's body reunited, and she returned to her human form. She wept with gratitude, embracing me tightly. Then she told me what we had to do next. I needed to slaughter 7 white chickens with golden feet. I had to dig a deep hole. I had to sharpen both a bolo and an axe. The next day, I went to Mang Tasho and retrieved my child. I told him everything that had happened. Mang Tasho, though not a full-fledged healer, had some knowledge passed down by his father, who had been a respected albulario. Although he didn't follow in his father's footsteps, he at least knew how to make protective charms. He gave me a rare sea herb, one that was believed to repel any flying aswang, preventing them from coming near. When I got home, I searched for the chickens Paloma needed. Then I dug. I dug deep until the hole was deeper than my own height. I placed a bridge over it, and in the middle, I laid the bodies of 7 slaughtered chickens. Meanwhile, I poured their blood into the pit. While my wife was performing a ritual, she uttered words that only she understood. She was supposedly calling upon her family's familiar spirits. The first to arrive was a crocodile, her father's familiar. Before it could even set foot on the bridge where the offering lay, I struck it with an axe. It couldn't fight back because of the ritual Paloma was performing. The ritual was meant to summon her family's familiars. I threw its dismembered body into the hole. The second to arrive was a wild boar, her mother's familiar. I used the same method. I also beheaded it. On the third summoning, a dog with burning eyes appeared, but I killed and beheaded it as well. The fourth was a black cat. It was about to approach Paloma, but I swiftly beheaded it too and threw its body into the deep pit. The last to arrive was a crow. I was about to kill it when Paloma spoke. She said it was her own familiar and begged me not to harm it. That crow, she claimed, was the one that carried her through the night, allowing her to fly and change form. She told me to simply drive it away, as it would become just an ordinary crow. If I killed it, Paloma's physical body would die as well. She asked me to let it go since she had only recently undergone the transfer. And with that, her transformation into a manananggal would come to an end. After completing the ritual, we hurriedly covered the pit with soil. We quickly packed our belongings and left Negros. The next day, her mother came looking for us. Crying, she called out from outside our house, pleading for the door to be opened. She said Paloma was needed by her father. I had no idea how she found us, but according to her, he was dying and needed to see Paloma one last time. We didn't answer. We stayed silent. Eventually, she left. Do you know what happened after that? When Paloma's mother returned home, before she could even enter their house, her husband, Akoy, took his final breath. Soon after, their mother herself began to struggle for life. Elmar and Eric were enraged. They stormed off to their sister's old house, shouting for their youngest sibling. They kicked down the door and broke it open. But we were long gone. They screamed that they would kill Paloma, that she was ungrateful, that no matter where she hid, their clan would find her, that they would hunt her down and tear her apart, that they would feast on me. They blamed me, saying that Paloma chose me over them. But after yelling and searching in vain, they found nothing. When they returned home, just like their dying mother, the two brothers also began to wither. And soon, the entire bloodline of Paloma's family perished. Years later, Lolo Tasho and his family moved to our place. Because after we left, almost every night, different eerie beings passed by their home, accompanied by terrifying sounds. Mang Tasho ended up in Cotabato. By pure chance, we crossed paths. He was the one who revealed what had happened after we left that place. Had we been found and failed to leave in time, Paloma's family or clan would have taken us. Every familiar we had slain would have been revived, and they would have come for us instead. After that, we lived a quiet life. We built a large family. Our children grew up normal, carrying with them the secret of the past, the fact that their mother had once been an Aswang. We would go on living as a family.